Blessings. Welcome to Think Beyond Two Evils. Am I frozen?
Yeah. No, you're not frozen, but your whole screen just went blurry. I don't know if it's just me.
It's
Okay.
I can yeah, it's been for me too.
Yeah, your screen just went completely blurred.
Okay, my apologies. All
Oh
right.
no, there you go. All right, back in focus.
Welcome. So I want to welcome everyone to Think Beyond Two Evils. This is going to be our live panel event on Black political power, specifically addressing the current political spectacle, another 4-year presidential selection cycle in the divided states. So I have a beautiful panel here of brilliant minds. So before we begin, I would like to just welcome everybody who is here with us. Welcome. I see our brother Rob Ijakadi was not able to be here, but sent us a lovely message. Um, Welcome. I'm grateful to be here for this discussion. It's a very necessary and I think really this conversation seems to be one that we tend to return back to at the same level. So I would love for us to have the opportunity to revolve the conversation, right? So it's not the same conversation we're having every presidential selection cycle. And I want to shout out our brother Shakara also, who's in the house. So welcome. So if you are here with us live, feel free to engage with us via the chat. You can put in your comments, your questions, and hopefully we can get to some of your questions throughout the stream today. So without further ado, I will introduce myself and then allow our panelists to introduce themselves. So I am Asneferka. I am the mother of Tehuti Ma'at. I am here really on behalf of the panelists to just kind of moderate and ask some very important questions that we can enlighten and just share some insight around other thoughts that we can have around this election and really questioning like what choices do we really have. So I would love to have the panelists introduce themselves at whatever order you choose.
I was gonna say you can point us out, like tell us.
You can go first, Brother Omawali. You got
Let's see,
the
look, put me on the spot. All right. Greetings, family. My name is Brother Omowale. I'm gonna keep it very short and simple. I am a father. I'm a husband. I'm someone who cares deeply about our people, and currently, I'm here tonight to engage in a discussion around Black political power and share some perspectives with some good brothers and sisters around this upcoming election. So, with that, I'll pass it to Dr. Kamal on the screen.
So greetings and greetings to everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on what your time zone is. I'm Dr. Kamal Rashid. I'm a professor at Northeastern Illinois University here in Chicago. I'm also the director of the Kemetic Institute of Chicago and the president of the Midwest region of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. Much like Brother Mawale, I'm also a husband and father, an advocate of Kujichagulia, that is self-determination for African people. So Sante, very glad to be here.
welcome. Thank you so much. We're glad to have you.
I'll jump in.
There you go. All
right. Greetings, everybody. My name is Zahir Oladuni Mobalaji Ture. That's born to manifest well. I am a priest of the Ewe Voodoo tradition, particularly out of Togo. I'm an enthusiast of African sovereignty and Black independence. And I'm very excited and glad to be here. And that's it.
Welcome.
Peace, everyone. So I'm Natasha. Screen name Natasha X, but I am a member of the Northeast Political Prisoners Coalition, so I do work around helping to release political prisoners. I also do community organizing, out in New York as well, and I am a current doctoral student focusing on African-centered education. and a former social studies teacher as well.
Sure. Welcome. Glad to have all your voices here with us today. Shout out to our brother Wisdom Bars and Sister Simone who are here with us live. So for anyone who may be here for the first time and you're not familiar with THNK Beyond and the work that we do, we are a revolutionary instrument that operates as a grassroots cooperative. So we do various different programs in the areas of healing, art, and education, and we focus on institution development in those areas, specifically with organizational methods and healing for the leadership or the warriorship within the institutions that are here to bring us forward into actualizing the African world revolution, the freedom that we are, moving forward into victory, right? So I would love to begin our discussion today with just anchoring everyone into the conversation that we're having. I think it's important for us to express to everyone that it is more of a dialogue. We are having a conversation. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of insightful things, a lot of educational, components to what is being shared, but ultimately we want it to be a conversation. So please feel free to engage with us, as I mentioned earlier, especially if you're here with us live. If you're watching the replay or the raw play, as we like to say, feel free to leave a comment and we would also get back to you via the comment section. So again, this is an ongoing conversation, I think up until November. So I would love for this engagement and this conversation to continue beyond this moment. One of the programs that Tehuti Ma'at and the African War College are bringing forward through our strategic partnership known as the Amos Wilson Collective is our educational platform called THNK. And that's essentially what this panel discussion is a part of. THNK is an acronym for Thoughts Hone New Knowledge. And the intention of THNK is for us to creatively bring forward educational content and opportunities and experiences for people. So one of the things we're launching for October is going to be our THNK Government Study Series, where we're going to specifically be discussing the idea of government rooted in the ancient wisdom of our Kemetic ancestors. So I'll share a little bit more about that at the end, but do know that this is an ongoing conversation that we want you to be a part of, but we want to make sure that we're starting the conversation on a level playing field in Ma'at, right? So we're all on the same page of what it is that we're talking about. So I want to start by asking the panelists to share with us what is politics and what are we talking about when we say, we're discussing Black political power. Can one of you begin by just giving us, just a foundational definition of what politics is, and also how does politics connect to economics and culture? Because we do want to have a holistic perspective, right? Where we have to make sure we have this conversation from an African-centered perspective that is holistic, and we're not dealing with it in isolated, compartmentalized, sections of ideas, but we want to make sure that we see how everything is interconnected. So what is politics and how does it connect to economics and culture?
I'll wade into those waters. From a sociological vantage point, politics is a system for organizing or a system of power. It's a way of managing power in any given social milieu. So politics, probably the two things to understand in this definition is that politics deals with a system, a particular system, right? An organized structure that's designed to carry out a particular function. And it also is oriented around power. Economics, of course, is also a system that's designed to facilitate the production, distribution, and also the consumption of goods and services. Again, similar to politics, economics also entails a system that deals specifically with production and dissemination. Therein, politics is inextricably linked. Politics, of course, deals with governance, but government and politics are not necessarily the same, right? This is why when, for all of us who have the misfortune of dealing with, different types of workplaces. There's always politics in the workplace, right? This is how power dynamics are governed in a particular given milieu. Of course, government is a particular type of institutional arrangement designed for the administration of politics. That is something which manages the type of political power which is inherent in the system of politics itself. Economics and politics, of course, very, very closely related, because inevitably in any given society, systems of economic systems are invariably bound within particular types of rules or structures, right? So if we take a society like the United States, you have laws that facilitate certain types of economic activity. You could consider, for instance, the various laws that facilitated, the enslavement, the exploitation of African people, the deprivation of the liberties of African people and the like, for the sake of facilitating the maximization of profit. So economics and politics are inextricably linked, because politics becomes a means of establishing the rules, that is the parameters, the policies that governs how systems of economy function. And it's not, and there's a certain interplay between these two systems. But I should end by noting that in the United States, of course, economic interests tend to hold sway over the political process. That is, those who have wealth and power, economic power, tend to dominate, tend to determine to an overwhelming degree the nature of governance in the society.
Give thanks.
Yeah, I don't. Go ahead.
Oh.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
I was just gonna definitely add on to what Dr. Kamal said in terms of thinking about politics and and maybe someone here on the panel can help me out if they remember who said the quote that everything is political. And so when people talk about well, we don't want to be political in this way, and we don't want to get too political, but politics isn't everything. So when we're thinking about power dynamics and systems of how do you deal with power and how people deal with each other and the decisions that are made in terms of who gets power, all of those things stem from people's worldview and their outlooks. And so that's political. Just the decisions that you're making on an everyday basis is governed by particular ideas about what should be based on, access in terms of access to economics, access to power, access to particular resources. So even all of those things, as much as people think that a lot of things are not political and that, well, we can leave this out of, there's entertainment and then there's politics, there's education and then there's politics. No, all of it is political. And because we're making particular decisions based on our own worldview. And so when we're thinking about thinking of it from an African-centered worldview, that's also crucial to when we're thinking about Black people and we're thinking about politics. What are those ideas that we're thinking about that are helping us make decisions about what's important? How do we organize things and prioritize things? And how do we create these systems of power? It's all based on our own understanding of the world.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far. It's funny. I'm reading the question and I'm very visual. So what's popping out to me right away is politics, economics, and culture. And I feel like Dr. Leonard Jeffries has this whole pyramid that deals with those three. So I don't know. Y'all keep me honest if I'm wrong there. And it's been a while since I saw a lecture on that, so it would be difficult for me to unpack. But immediately what's coming to mind for me from a war college perspective, right, is that, oftentimes it's said that politics is war by other means. And simplifying that, I like to say that, politics is war, right? And economics just determines how you allocate or spread out the spoils of war. And then culture really just drives, culture is ultimately your behavior, your beliefs, your values, right? So that determines what you go to war for, you know what I mean? So I don't know, I like to keep everything within that purview of war because it makes it very simple, So politics, and another way of looking at it is that politics is how power dresses in public, you know what I mean? So in one way or another, everything is truly political. But I guess I'll land my plane by just restating that politics is war, economics is how you manage or spread out the spoils of war, and then culture just drives or informs what reasons you go to war for.
And I was gonna add too that what I liked about that definition is it what it does, it kind of lays out an objective look on the concept of politics and economics. But at the same time, we understand that culture is kind of like the embodiment of all of the ideas that also influence, how we particularly govern in our society. Like, the culture may dictate, those decisions, whether it's republic, individuals deciding, because the ideas may be a little bit more libertarian versus a consensus based, which may reflect the type of African ideal, based on a type of communalism. And of course, all that interplays with your particular society where you're at on the continent or Europe, like small groups versus larger groups. So I think that, to me, the most important thing is culture, because I think it's Marimba Ani. I saw that book in your background, Omowale, the Asili of a culture that really drives. It's that underlining that drives the politics and the economics. How do we decide? What are those ideas that influences those behaviors?
Can I just add one little thing also in relation to everything that everyone said? I think part of why this question is so valuable is that we have to understand that there's nothing fundamentally inevitable about the type of political and economic arrangements that Europeans have created in the world, right? Because when we look at our ancestors, particularly, we can look at very specific examples, right? We can look at systems of governance among the Congo people in Foucault's book, Nana Foucault's book, Mbongi is a good example of this. We can look at systems of governance among the Igbo and others. We can look certainly at the Nile Valley, and Jacob H. Carruthers wrote voluminously about this, particularly in his book, Metal Nature. He writes about governance in the ancient Kemet. The point is that our ancestors also dealt with this question of how do we deal with power in the society? How do we deal with addressing the material needs for people in the society? And what we find are different type of institutional arrangements which emerge, and those different type of institutional arrangements were a consequence of their worldview. And so the arrangements that the West has created are not inevitable. These are things that are reflections, as has been said already, of the worldview of a particular people, driven primarily by avarice, that is greed, and the need to satisfy that greed through means of war, as Brother Omowale has mentioned. This is, again, not a universal worldview. That is, it's not a universal worldview that's shared among all of humanity. And certainly we find very distinct, very divergent models from this decadent model among African people.
I just wanted to add one more thing. Sorry, because Brother Kamal reminded me of something. In terms of thinking about what you were talking about in terms of, and also connecting to what Brother Omowale said in terms of greed, in terms of war, how do you go about getting those resources? But also thinking about how the conception of politics, especially thinking about the theoretical lineage of politics in European society, and thinking about Machiavelli, which plays like a huge role. And when Europeans are thinking about politics and how we see politics today, the connection when we're thinking about culture and morality, how morality shows up based on your own cultural view and how you see morality as tied to politics. So whereas in a European way or a Western way of thinking, morality may not be tied into politics, but if we think about through indigenous African ways of knowing, you're seeing that morality is completely tied up in politics too. So I think that's also an important point when we're thinking about politics.
You
Thank you,
muted.
Mike.
Yep.
Yeah, muted. Absolutely. Give thanks to Sister Natasha. I'm so glad that you made the point about morality, because what I was gonna enter in to answer what or confirm what Brother Omowale said earlier about the pyramid analysis by Dr. Leonard Jeffries. So that's exactly why I wanted to make sure that we connected politics to economics and culture, because Dr. Leonard Jeffries introduced us to the pyramid analysis, giving us an African-centered approach to how we want to critically analyze and think through situations, looking at all three spectrums. So also Brother Zaire mentioned that he felt that culture was the most important. And I do think culture is at the top of that pyramid. And the culture is really about the cosmology, right? It's also what anchors the people in their actual existence, right? When we look back at our ancient ancestors, we didn't only anchor ourselves into the land and nature, we also anchored ourselves cosmically. So we were cosmically oriented, right? We had a 26,000 year calendar that observed the movement of the cosmos, and the whole embodiment of our government, what the basis of the government was the embodiment of cosmic order through the principle of Ma'at, right? Which is essentially what we're kind of given this illusion of through even the European system that is expressing itself now, right? When you go to a court, you will see the scales of Ma'at present. There are some aspects that are used to kind of create this illusion that there is a sense of morality or what they would call ethics. And I think that that's one of the biggest differences that we experience in the so-called Western world, in the way that government has devolved from the ancient African way. So I wanted to kind of just give that layout so that we recognize, yes, we're talking about, in order to zoom in to the moment we're in right now, right? As Africans colonized in the States, we've zoomed out to kind of get an overview of like, what are we really talking about? Now I would like for us to zoom in on the current, colonial regime and how it functions politically. And the question that I would like us to move into is really thinking about this dividing line that the people are given, right? To think about like, the left and the right, the conservative and the liberal. If anyone wants to begin with answering this question about what exactly are these two sides of the coin and why are we given this dividing line as the division, that we have to choose either or.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is excited to jump at this particular question right here. And as someone whose background is in accounting, not necessarily poli sci, what I will say. So it says, what is a democracy and what is a republic? Um, I don't have. I mean, I could pull up Google to like actually spell out the definitions here, to read them. But I will say here, within this situation that we exist with in America, I guess this situation is known as a representative democracy. So I guess the concept of a democracy is one in which you have rule by many or rule by the people, so to speak. Whereas though in a representative democracy, I think that the system of governance and law, I guess, is maintained. That's my guy right here. He said the republic was created to check a government by the people. Which, but by the way, all right, I'm going on a tangent just a little bit, but if you're watching this on, because this question is very specific, I did do a 2-part lecture back in 2020 called Malcolm X and the Neoliberal Assault on Democratic Rule. So using kind of like slide decks and sources and things of that nature. There's a part 1 and a part 2. If you're watching it on the Omawale Africa YouTube channel, within the description, I linked those 2 lectures. They're unlisted, so you won't be able to find them by searching YouTube for it. But if you're interested in that content, those 2 lectures are there, the part 1 and the part 2. But yeah, so I don't think I have a good answer for like what is a democracy and what is a republic, like just like off the top of my head. But what I will say is we exist within a representative democracy, which essentially means you have represented officials that represent a number or a body of people. I don't necessarily want to get into all the mechanics of that because I'm not necessarily qualified without referencing a resource to just kind of like talk off the top of the head on this question. So now that I fell on the sword there, does anybody else want to take a stab at it or broaden this particular question?
I'll take a stab at it, trying to remember my social studies roots in teaching, U.S. history. So I know that one of the things that they talk about in terms of like also when we're thinking about where the ideas for the type of government that this country would have comes from. So we know they're thinking through, Athens and, Athenian democracy, and they're looking at Rome, as a republic. And, then you have them also, obviously, when they're here, getting ideas from indigenous people that are, in terms of how they've structured their society. And so ultimately they decide on what they call a democratic republic. Right. So they call themselves, as the country, a democratic republic, where, kind of going to what you were saying, Omwali, where, you have the votes where, the people can vote, but they're voting for representatives. Their votes are not directly going to choose whoever their representative is. That's where you kind of have, where they create Congress, and you have representatives within both the House and the Senate, because people are electing them, as well as then you have the what is the contentious what is it called again, where everybody votes, the Electoral College.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, where then everyone's votes go to an electorate that then votes in secret, and then it's decided based on, but when the way that it's supposed to work is that the Electoral College is supposed to vote in the same way that those people who have voted voted. So if, let's say, if it's in New York, and a majority of votes were Democratic, for the Democratic Party, then that representative in the Electoral College is supposed to vote Democratic. But there is I don't know if you would call it like, what do they call it, a hole, or like a little way you can get decided, where because it's a vote that, just like when you cast your votes, nobody else is in there with you in the booth, you could choose something different than whatever the people had voted. And so therefore you have what this country would call a democratic republic, where yes, the people are voting, but you're voting for people to represent you. So I'm trying to get, because I it's a little convoluted, especially with the electoral politics, Electoral College part of it. But
I want to wade into this also, because I think in order to I appreciate the direction that Sister Natasha was going in, because I think in order to understand a thing, you have to understand its origins, right? And I really very much appreciate that she referred to Athens, because indeed, right, for Europeans who say this is the origins of democracy, and I think if we interrogate the nature of Athenian democracy, it tells us a lot about the ethos of the ancient Greeks, as well as the ethos of the West, right? The ethos of Europeans today. Well, of course, Athenian democracy was a system in which all free males could participate. And this is very interesting, because it should be noted that, of course, all people in a society are generally not male, right? So this tells us at least that half of the people, let's just assume half the people in society are not male. This tells us at least half the members of the society were barred from participating in the democracy. The second thing that this tells us is that the other people, that is, the people who are not free, are also barred from participating in this democracy. And I've seen some estimates that have suggested that the idea that Athenian democracy basically enabled roughly a quarter of the population to participate in the political process, as women and also enslaved individuals were not allowed to participate. Again, this is profoundly significant, because the framing or the presentation of democracy is something which is a system which facilitates the expression of human freedom, right? That democracy, in fact, is the embodiment of freedom. But when we look at the roots of this system, we find a system which is predicated upon unfreedom, the negation of freedom, right? And the marginalization of not just some members of the society, but the majority of the society, right? If we look further, jump forward some millennia or so, to the so-called modern era and the emergence of the liberal democracies of the West, it is noted. In fact, we can use this one that we're living in, right, as an example. At its inception, of course, the United States did not allow all, of course, certainly everyone to vote. We know that, right? Of course, we know that Africans couldn't vote, and we know that indigenous folks couldn't vote. But also, at a certain point, non-land-owning men couldn't vote. Of course, we know women couldn't vote also, I should say, but at a certain point, non-land-owning men, were barred from voting. Their participation in the political process is limited. Now, this is very significant, Because again, the presentation or the framing is that the society is a republic, the society that and as such is a system which allows the expression of freedom, a type of freedom which was denied to individuals under monarchy. But what we see when we look at the very beginnings of American democracy and the course of American democracy, the transition from monarchy to republic simply represented the transition of power from the power being in the purview of a monarchy to power being in the purview of a non-monarchistic elite, right? So we go from a monarchical elite to a political elite or an economic elite, or non-monarchical elite, to make it simple. And so the point that I'm making is that democracy or the or a republic, which is simply a form of or an expression of democracy, is Omwale, a representative democracy, we refer to it as such. In both contexts or in both examples, in terms of how these types of systems have emerged in the West, they are both systems that are, again, predicated upon the institutionalization of unfreedom for the majority, not some, but in fact, the majority of the people within them. Now, of course, one could argue that this is not the case today, that indeed liberal democracy expanded to include all members of the society under its, its aegis, right? But it begs the question of whether such a thing is true. Again, if we go back to the previous question about the interrelationship between politics and economics, when we live in a society where powerful economic interests hold sway, there's no, and I don't want to jump ahead too much, but I'll simply say there's no context in which the electorate of the United States could vote for someone who will greatly diminish the military-industrial complex. Like, that ain't going to happen. There's no arrangement, there's no configuration of social circumstances, of societal circumstances, where people are going to elect someone to power who are going to negate the interests of the medical and pharmaceutical industry. Could it happen? Sure.
Yeah.
It's probably a fantasy world, but it's not, but it's not likely to happen. Again, because we live in a society where particular economic interests hold sway. So I would argue that each of these historical manifestations of democracy represent a revision of the same idea. Again, under Athenian democracy, we have the negation of power of the masses in order to enshrine the interests of a particular minority. In the emergence of the Western liberal democracy or the Western republics, we find the creation of a system which continues to negate the interests of the masses for the sake of maintaining the interests of a non-monarchical elite. And in the contemporary democracy or the republic in which we live, we find a system where the masses are given the illusion of participation, but they're really participating in a system which upholds the interests of a particular economic and political elite.
Yeah. I really appreciate you dropping that. I think one of the reasons why it's it's like when you drop these definitions, right? Like, what is a democracy? What is a republic? Like, on the face, like, it looks incredibly simple to like speak to that. Again, like, everybody can go search like the Google definition, but I think that the reason why those questions in and of themselves are challenging because they don't really get to like the root of the matter. Like, those questions are speaking to like the facade of what this situation is that we kind of find ourselves in. And essentially, what I mean by that, like, the system that we exist within, I mean, you can call it by any number of names that apply, but it is truly more of it's a militarized kleptocracy, right? It's a system of theft and plunder, and the laws that are established are meant to maintain, the status quo. Like, it's meant to maintain and protect the holders of said theft and plunder, which goes back to like that initial question that was asked about politics and economics and culture, which is why I stated that politics is war and economics is just essentially how you allocate the spoils of that war, right? And essentially the policies that you put in place are and to truly simplify the laws and legislative process of this kleptocracy, it's essentially, no snatchbacks. We took it from y'all, and it's illegal to take it back. You know what I mean? Like, this is a criminal settler colony, so it's really hard to get into kind of like third grade, sixth grade, what is a democracy? What is a republic? I remember like they used to, the whole, I don't know if y'all remember like the constitutional bill song and all like that. Like, so yeah, that takes you back to elementary school. But I think that's why it's really hard because to kind of even to add on to what Brother Kamal was saying, if you look at the history, right? Like so like the Senate in this country used to be referred to as like the cooling plate. So essentially, the House of Representatives, if by chance they were running a fever and tried to pass something through that was populist or for the people, then the Senate would serve as a way to ensure that let's say if the House decided to defund the military, the Senate would be in play to cool that off, to make sure that that type of law wouldn't pass, so it would maintain the status quo. Which is why, like when you look at the history of this country, you couldn't even vote for a senator until 1913. Senators were appointed in the United States of America up until 1913. At which point, an interesting piece of history is that also the same time in which the Federal Reserve was erected. So it comes to that point of what the Rothschild guy said. I care not who makes the laws as long as I control the money. What it all comes down to is really just maintaining the spoils of war that have been collected into the hands of a very small few over this 500-year period. And now all the legislation that we see is essentially, how do we protect and make sure that those who stole get to hold on to everything that they stole? Like, so.
I wanted to join in because that's a good way to segment what I was going to say, because we talk about the left and the right, and this has its origins in the French Revolution, right? So it has its origin in two sides of this struggle that the French were having, where one is talking about, oh, this is conservative, we want to conserve the order, the monarch as it is, and then it's the left wing that says they want to have this revolutionary struggle and reform and change. And so we look about how that influences America. We use the same terms, left and then right, and one's supposed to be conserving America as it is, the right wing conservatives, grand old party, and then you have the left, which is supposed to be like the Democrats, and that's supposed to lead into the reforms, right? And so like kind of historically, it's like the form has always been seen as something that Black folks tend to attach themselves to, and I think this is the big problem, because it gives this like illusion of true progress, but that reform, it keeps us attached to America in this sense, which I think is the big problem, because it's like, oh, let's look at these breadcrumbs that, oh, they give us this little reform. So I think Malcolm X said they stab you in the back, right? 6 inches, pull out 3, and they call it progress. And those are those little breadcrumbs that represent reform on the Democrat side. And it's, oh, see, well, look, they gave us some voting acts. They're doing better. Oh, the police are killing us, but they slapped one on the wrist and they suspended him without leave. So without pay. So things are getting better. And if we look at progress in terms of this left and right spectrum of America, right, then we stay stuck in that matrix. And that's why I've always been a fan of somebody like Malcolm X, who was always thinking, how do we go beyond that? How do we think in terms of our own nation? Because this is what keeps us, I think, in that that two-party line dynamic.
I really appreciate you expanding on that, because it naturally transitioned us into what the follow-up question is in terms of identifying. They're giving us the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, right? There's symbols associated with all of this, which is really how the public, the people, I should say, are manipulated in this whole process. So I would love to get more of a sense of why you feel that we're given these two party lines to look at, as if there are no other choices within it, right? So, because we've been able to identify the fact that it really is an illusion, right? It's an illusion of choice, and there's a strategy to why. So I'm wondering if anyone can speak on why this is the strategy that is used by this Greco-Roman paradigm.
You already addressed it, by referring to it as like the illusion of choice. It's a child's game. It's like window drapings for how to achieve the same goal, which is, the maintenance of this system that is, killing the planet and all life on the planet. You know what I mean? Like, when it comes to, the Democrats versus the Republicans, like, there's just so much mythology that we really have to like unpack to allow people to see things clearly. For an example, I mean, I think Nkrumah in his book, on guerrilla warfare, like he calls out the notion of, like, Western democracy, and how it's essentially it's a farce, how it's hypocrisy, and how it is a means of spreading imperial domination. Like, when we say that we're bringing democracy to other countries and other nations, what it really means is we are laying out the runway for us to come in and have our way with your resources, for us to control your political process, for us to control your governance, to ensure that your politics are structured in a way that are conducive to the continued raping of your resources by, U.S. economic interests. That's what, democracy for all basically means in a nutshell. But, even like this mythology that we hear every year in America, or every 4 years, about the so-called peaceful transition of power. Power does not transition peacefully. Like, that's a falsehood. So if you believe that, if they're telling you that, the power has changed hands from one to another peacefully, that means that the power actually did not change hands. The facade, the face of who gets to manage, the property or manage the assets, right? The managerial class has changed. And that can either be Democratic and or Republican, but the power, those who control and own resources and dominate the planet, that never changes. That's your, I don't, if you call it your shadow government, whatever you choose to call it. But, like, yeah, it really is, it's an illusion of choice. You know what I mean? Whether you're choosing between a Republican or a Democrat, like, they're both meant to maintain the same situation. Their approach to doing so is just slightly different. You understand what I'm saying? Like, you may get one that's going to, like, uh like, you get one that'll just usher you into the gas chamber, and then you get the other one that's like, hey, here go these abortion pills. You know what I mean? Like, it's just slightly different. One is a bit more benign. One allows them to stomach themselves and look at themselves in the mirror, right? Because it's like, you know, it still upholds the illusion of democracy. It upholds the illusion of, like, fairness if you go with one versus, like, the other. So I'm gonna stop because now I'm rambling. So I'll pass it on to somebody else in the group.
Well, I'll wait, and that I think that you all nailed it. We given in any oppressive system, one of the ways that let me say this, in an oppressive system is it's actually resource inefficient to keep the people under constant, incessant, violent subjugation, right? Where you're knocking them over the head every 5 minutes to get what you want. The problem with that is that it's relatively easy to compel people to acquiesce physically, but breaking them mentally is a greater challenge, because there's always the possibilities. Europeans found out, as they were constantly reminded of during the era of enslavement, right? Even of people who seem to be defeated may harbor in their hearts and minds a will to resist and a desire to be free, right? And so a system that's predicated upon naked coercion, naked violence, can become resource inefficient over the course of time. A more efficient system is to create one whereby people have the illusion of freedom, and a part of that illusion of freedom is the illusion of choice, right? And this is not speaking in hyperbole. If we're in the context of this society and the two dominant parties. I was looking at a graphic that was posted on Open Secrets table, rather, where they showed military funding, funding from the defense industry, right? The military industrial complex. And at the time, I don't know if anything's changed in the last 15 days, but Kamala Harris was out on top. She had gotten more money from the military industrial complex than her competitor. And of course, there's a long list of people in Congress who are collecting, hundreds of thousands, thousands, millions, and so forth from this industry. And so it's not hyperbole to point out the fact that we're talking about two parties which essentially reflect the same economic interests. What differs in these two parties are generally is the rhetoric of domination. That is, whether or not that rhetoric is very caustic, as in the case of the Republican Party, especially, to greater or lesser degrees over the last 24 years, or whether that rhetoric is more conciliatory in the context of the Democratic Party and the sort of posture, the political posture they've taken probably over the last 50 years. And we said caustic, the proposition is even 24 years. I would say 50 years, perhaps also, especially if we put this in the context of the Nixon administration of being tough on crime. So that takes us back past 50. But my point is this: both of these parties reflect a similar economic and political interest. And again, and I have to emphasize the intention or this tendency especially among Black political pundits, to draw a dichotomy between the two is very disingenuous. I mean, indeed, it was the Reagan administration that waged the war on drugs, but it was the Clinton administration in which you got, crime bills and an acceleration of the mass incarceration of particularly of Black men in the United States. It was certainly the Bush administration that launched the war on terror, but the Obama administration exceeded Bush in terms of his use of drone strikes in parts of Eurasia, parts of southern and central Eurasia. You could even, my point is that each of these parties reflect a very similar economic interest. What differs is the type of performative presentation or the way that these policy decisions are performed for the public. And again, for the Democratic Party, the tendency is to engage in a type of performance which attempts to mask the degree to which these choices reflect the interests of a particular elite and represent, the perpetuation of human suffering. Whereas for the Republicans, the extent to which policy choices which are made, perpetuate human suffering is often out in the open. But they frame it as the suffering is not you, it's them. Whoever they are, right? Whether those people are some racialized or oppressed group or some foreign enemy, whatever the case may be. And so again, I'll wrap all this up to say that part of the dichotomy between these two organizations is to constrain people's ways of thinking about politics. We should ask ourselves as African people, and as African people who hopefully are mindful of the need of the imperative for African sovereignty, what choice would Nat Turner make between the Democrat or the Republican Party? Did he identify with either of these? Would he have identified? Or Denmark Vesey, or Malcolm X, or Marcus Garvey? Would they conceive of either of these parties as being an effective vehicle for the interests of African people? Do either of these parties represent a vehicle that is anyway consequential in terms of our notions of futurity? And to me, this is the most dangerous thing, that we are surrounded, our community at least, is inundated with Black political pundits for whom our notions, the horizon of Black political possibility, is signified by these two corporatist organizations. And this is extremely problematic and extremely dangerous.
Wow. Dr. Go ahead, jump in, because I have some problematic points to insert into the discussion.
When Dr. Kamal was mentioning, like who, would have these Malcolm X or Nat Turner or some of these ancestors have sided with the Republicans or the Democrats, it makes me think about something that I learned recently, how before his death, Martin Luther King was going to run on an independent party line for the presidency. And so when we think about, especially like when we think about those that people like Martin Luther King, that this country, wants to, basically take parts of and piece apart and place it on a pedestal for you to align with, and a lot of the times say things that they would have never done. If those things that they're pushing toward Martin Luther King as like having been thinking in such a way that like this country was the best country and we just have to like go along to get along with them, if somebody like Martin Luther King wanted to run on an independent party, that tells you, like if we would compare Martin Luther King to like a Nat Turner, right? If we know what King's answer would be, then the answer for Nat Turner would, is like, it's like a no-brainer. So I think that a lot of people don't realize these things too, especially when we're thinking about the way that we're miseducated through the school systems and not really even given real education, real political education on top of that within it, but also how there's a lack of political education that even exists within our communities because of the fact that there's been, in the same way that these two parties have come to dominate, the same tactics have been used to make sure we don't have the real political education in within our systems, whether it's through murdering those who are really putting up a challenge, whether it's going through the courts and jailing them, whether it's charging them and making with false claims and making rules and regulations. These are all the things that have been done by both parties in conjunction to make sure that these are the only two parties that exist. So it's not by happenstance that, you have these two parties. No, it's been a very concerted effort. We know since even the mid 19th century that they've worked together to make sure that they're the two parties, because it's not like the Constitution says that, there should be only two parties. The Constitution doesn't say anything about, parties in general. But this is what has become, because they've worked together to make sure that they're the two, and they continue. So like when we think about today, when you hear third party candidates talking about the attacks that are coming directly from the Democratic Party, that is in line with historically what they have done to make sure that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are the two parties that people feel that are the only choices that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Can I
before you go in Omawale, I feel like you got brewing there.
Go ahead.
I wanted to just speak to this comment that's on here, because when I mentioned earlier that for our THNK study group in October, we're going to be covering the wisdom of Kemetic governance. This is actually a quote from there. I don't know if this is a brother or a sister, but thank you for sharing this randomly. But it says conflicts of interest were handled through litigation of private individuals or groups rather than through politics among constitutionally or philosophically based power groups. So the idea of having two parties wasn't even legitimized when we think about an African-centered approach or how governance and Kemet functioned, right? So I just wanted to mention that again to those who are interested, because we would love for people to join the ARC, which we call the African Rehabilitation Center. That is our Amos Wilson Collective Hub. So if you're interested in joining, you can join by joining the African War College or joining the Tehuti Ma'at Militia. Those are our two membership programs. And you would be able to participate in our study group, where we're going to be covering that chapter of Kemet and the African Worldview, which is a collection of research from the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization. So we'll share with you the excerpt from the text, the chapter on the wisdom of governance in Kemet, if you're interested in going further into this. So I just wanted to do a little plug there for our THNK study group. You can go ahead, Omawale.
Yeah, I was about to troll y'all a little bit and say I hope y'all don't mind if I get into some good trouble. But no, in all seriousness, man, this is so not black and white right now. And there's so many different like shades of gray in this moment that we find ourselves in. And the reason why I say that is, if I look at the historical record, like one thing is certain, and it's that whenever Europeans fight each other, African people get free. We've seen that historically, that when they are going up against each other, specifically at these transition periods where there's a grasp for greater power among these European entities, they typically weaken one another, and it allows space for African people to alter our reality and gain strength and gain power. I would say that the issue is, I don't think that we're presently organized in a way where we could take advantage of these opportunities as they present themselves and will continue to present themselves. I mean, I think that we're in a point right now. You talked about naked violence, right? we've been seeing, one group that's blowing up beepers and, killing people all over the planet, like unapologetically, like a whole terrorist state being funded by both the Democrats and the Republicans. Both the Democratic candidate and the Republican candidate has agreed to fund this particular terrorist state ongoing, right? But that's another topic. What I wanted to get into some trouble on was this conversation around, like, what would Nat Turner choose, right? If we're looking at the two here, and I guess I got to fall on the sword. I got to make myself vulnerable just for the purposes of expanding the borders of this conversation, only because there's a lot at play here. And what I mean is, when the British were fighting their rebellious children, African people saw an opportunity to get free, so they jumped in that war on the side of the British. When the South was fighting the North, African people saw an opportunity to get free, so they jumped in that war on the side of the North. And it's like the political and military landscape is always shifting, and you have to have a fine-tuned ear for it, right? So if we're looking at the 19th century, right, the Republican Party of that day is the Democratic Party of the day, right? We know that it has shifted around. I mean, and if you look at the tail end of the 20th century, right, the Bush Republicans and the Clinton Democrats, well, both that party of, those caricatures of Republican and Democrat both find themselves presently in today's Democratic Party, right? Today's Democratic Party is the party of PNAC, right? The Project for a New American Century, right? It is the party of the neocons, which is why you're saying, like, Kamala is getting all this funding, from the war machine, because things are shifting. Obama, and I talk about this in the two-part lecture I did back in 2020 called Malcolm X and the Neoliberal Assault on Democratic Rule. And one of the things that I point out is, leading up to Obama at the beginning of the 21st century, the powers that be were so scared of this emerging populist movement, right, that was calling for true change. So they needed a faux populist candidate. So they created one that was hatched right out of the foundations in the form of Barack Hussein Obama, right? Which is why you got folks like Cornel West referring to Obama as a Rockefeller Republican in blackface, right? So they gave you this entity that is beholden to the Project for a New American Century, beholden to the neoconservative and neoliberal interests, right, as this idea of, like, change, right? Populism is actually winning. It's like a story that's made right out of Hollywood. But what we saw emerge in 2010, and after the housing crisis, you get on the left, you get the Occupy Wall Street populist movement, and on the right, you get the Tea Party populist movement. Now, the Occupy Wall Street movement, that emerged with the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016, and you get Trump in 2020 for the Tea Party folks. Now, the establishment party, Democrat, which houses the legacy Republicans and the current Democrats, right, that party made sure to squash the Bernie situation. But the Republican Party actually succumbed to a revolt that was led by Trump and these MAGA folks, right? So it's like, now it's such an interesting landscape, because when you're looking at politics both locally and globally, the world has shifted in such a way that you have people, how they say a broken clock is right at least twice a day, but you got people like the Tucker Carlsons of the world, like, being right on certain issues. You got the crazy Candace Owens of the world being right on certain issues. And when I look at the two right now in this Democratic Party and this Republican Party, not that I'm voting for either, but for me, I would say that there's a clear lesser of two evils. And I'll stop there, because that's enough good trouble for the moment. And I'll pass it to my fellow panelists.
Well, I feel like a big problem is that, like, we always big up, like, the ancestors of the past, and we get stuck in the past, right? I mean, there's a big kind of theme going on that the 60s and 70s are over, and we need to kind of, like, push past that and remix these ideals or update them for our modern times. So, I think and I think I know what you're saying. I when I think about politics and would Martin Luther King or Malcolm X interact with Democrats or Republicans, I think that what we ought to do is think about it in terms of where we are today and where we're trying to go. Because I would like to look at it in a sense of, if I have this African agenda, which one of these two would support it, or which one of these two would be most against that particular agenda? I'm kind of speaking towards Shaka Ra's question, where he says like a Nat Turner, was in posture of an open rebellion. I don't think we're in a presence where that kind of rebellion would happen, in a sense that would shift towards an African consciousness. So I think we have to reconfigure what our plans are in the here and now, and kind of build from there, and try to approach politics in this real tangible manner as we go along.
I would also add to that
voting, and I'm not against any of that stuff either. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Say it again, because I think I cut some of what you were saying off.
No, that's it. I was just saying I'm not against by any means, as Malcolm would say, and that means I'm not against any kind of interaction, where it's voting or organizing towards a certain goal. But what is that goal, and what does that look like in today's era? And I kind of want to get past recycling old ideas.
Yeah, I would say that. So I guess two things. I definitely would say that there's an interaction between the past and the present that is and the future that is always happening, right? So that the past is always informing the present, and the future is always informing the present at the same time, and that the future is also informed by the present and the past, right? So we know that these things are constantly happening back and forth, and that what we're doing is, we know we're engaged in a protracted struggle. So what we're doing is we're building upon, right? And like you're saying, adjusting for the times and the things that we have to do. I think part of what the issue is for us today, when we think about how do we engage with this particular political system within the United States, that also obviously is connected to the global European hegemony and politics of imperialism and colonialism that still exists today. I think the question about the past is that we're not properly being informed by the past, right? A lot of what people think today is, you have to reinvent the wheel, right? That there aren't ideas and establishments that we've done in the past that we can build upon and, switch things and maybe take some of those things and continue on. Because we know that, like, even culturally, when we're thinking about culture is informed by the past, but we know it's moving, and it's not like when we know that culture is not static, and yes, it moves and adapts to its context and its time. It's not with over a period of 20 years, right? It's not over a period of 60 years. When we're thinking about how cultures change and adapt, we're thinking about them over hundreds of years of how those things happen. And I think because of the fact that, when we think about our history overall, and this space and time that we're in is a small fraction of the actual, long history that we do have, and thinking back to how do we use the things that have been done in the past to inform what we're doing now, that there's a really big knowledge gap that hasn't happened, where people don't really know about a lot of the independent political parties that Black people have had consistently, from Reconstruction up until now, and how those have been real challenges in real places that we've gone. And even when we're thinking about, like, okay, a Nat Turner or Martin Luther King, how they were also always thinking outside of the establishment as well. While the establishment, you're interacting with them strategically, you're also thinking outside of the establishment. You're also organizing outside of the establishment. You're also creating political parties that are not within these two, and that are really challenging them. And a lot of the times when you look back into American history, those are the things that are pushing and getting us to the things that we need. It's not necessarily these two parties, it's the power that we're amassing and the political power that we're creating outside of them that's really posing a challenge for them to sometimes in certain times make concessions that they know that they can take back whenever they want to. So I think that's really, when we're thinking about today's time and how do we maneuver, one, having a better informed history of, because a lot of political when we think about Black political pundits, they don't want you to think even about another party, right? They don't even want you to think about an alternative. They just want you, and they don't even want to talk about how historically those alternatives have been the thing that has moved either of these parties to do things that they otherwise would not do. But that conversation is not even happening. It's just you either vote for this one or you vote for that one, and that's the only thing. And if you don't, oh my gosh, you're threatening our security, you're threatening our safety. We're all after this. We're all gonna die if Kamala doesn't win.
I want to wade into the realm, the sort of terrain that's been laid, and I really appreciate Sister Natasha's remarks. And I want to just lead with some of them that Mama Rimbani wrote. I believe it's in this book, To Heal the People. Her essay in there, she writes, "It would help to understand the way Europeans and Euro-Americans have used icons to promote and ensure loyalty and identification with national objectives. Often the icons are camouflaged. In this way, they are better able to affect the psyche on a subliminal level." And I want to go to Brother Shaka Rai's question. And that, the reason I posed the question, because clearly, right, I think, one could look at the question, the rhetorical question, right? What path would Nat Turner choose? Certainly a rhetorical element to that question. But part of why I posed the question, why I named the folks that I named, is that, these folks are people whose political horizons were not set by Europeans. That is, they were not aspiring to actualize a sense of future reality for African people within the parameters of the European worldview, nor European social structures, right? They were, by contrast, attempting to eradicate those structures. And so this is a very powerful question. And again, to Shaka Rai's point, right? African people are not in a proto-revolutionary stage of consciousness. Certainly not in the United States. Maybe somewhere, maybe in some places. And I could think of maybe a place or two where there might be a considerable number of people who are in a proto-revolutionary state of consciousness. But that is not the state of consciousness of the masses of African people, and for a variety of reasons. And I think part of the challenge is, and this again goes back to the myopia of the Black political pundits, or the myopia of political discourse in the Black community, is that politics in our community oftentimes extends, or that is, our participation within the political process often extends only to voting. And this is the problem, right? Again, what did Nat Turner want for African people? Nat Turner wanted sovereignty, right? What did DeMarc Vesey want for African people? DeMarc Vesey wanted sovereignty. What did Malcolm X want for African people? Malcolm X wanted sovereignty. What did Marcus Garvey want for African people? Marcus Garvey wanted sovereignty. We could also interrogate the methodology which were proposed, right? For Nat Turner, the goal was sovereignty. The means was revolutionary struggle, right? For Malcolm X, the goal was sovereignty. The means was revolutionary struggle. For Marcus Garvey, the goal was sovereignty. The means was, building a Pan-African nation. Each of these folks have given us a particular vision of political reality that in many ways is fundamentally de-linked from the European political project and institutions. And so, whereas I would agree, because again, I'm not an advocate of voting. I vote, in really every election cycle since Obama, so since 2008, and I vote for practical reasons. I don't want some mad person to get elected to be the Cook County assessor and they raise my water bill, 50%. I don't want to eyes jump out of my head looking at the water bill. I'm for practical reasons. But I also recognize the limitations of voting. I'm not naive enough to believe that African people are going to vote their way into sovereignty, or that African people are going to vote. We're going to vote our way into the type of future possibility which some of those people that I named aspire to. And so I think the challenge is we have to see beyond the horizons that have been imposed upon our vision, the very narrow horizon that's been the finite horizon that's been imposed upon our vision regarding what politics is and what the fundamental limitations are of participating in the political process. We have to, as Sister Natasha, mentioned earlier, we have to have a very clear idea of what it is that we're attempting to do and the means through which we attempt to accomplish those things, seeing politics as a tool, as a lever to achieve very limited ends within that larger process.
Good, thanks. I want to just jump in briefly because I think just rooting us in that piece is so important, because we're talking about power, and I always love to reference Dr. Huey P. Newton's definition of power. Power is the ability to define phenomenon and make it act in a desired manner. Because we haven't defined so many of these different elements that are necessary for us to actually create the reality that we want, to an extent, we still have to be present within what is given to us. And what I feel like can really root us to take us into like the real like key question, which is like, what is the posture, or what is the position, what position for those Africans colonized in America do each of you suggest? Or, what do you think is the appropriate position to take within this current selection cycle, right? And Dr. Kamal Rashid, you just spoke to the key piece of making sure that we're rooted in both and. I don't know if it's cutting me out. Can you guys still hear me?
No, you're good. You're good.
Yeah.
You're cooking. You just froze. All right.
No, this Wi-Fi be on and off. Okay, so I thought it was off because it's like blocking out on my screen.
Your face is
So
frozen. Turn your camera
the
off and
both
turn your
and,
camera back on, but your audio we can still hear. There might be a delay. Yeah, there might be just a slight. All right, she's back. All right, there you go.
okay. I would just love for someone, because it's not, I want to stay in the position that I'm in. I'm healing right now, but I really want someone to please speak on Ma'at so that we can really root how we can do both and. We don't have to choose either or. And that's the entire point of us looking at these two sides, to recognize that there's only one thing. And instead of us being divided between or pulled between two sides, can someone just speak to Ma'at? Because I know that my connection is off and I don't want to just keep holding it up.
I guess I can try and jump in on this first. So I think in terms of and I think Brother Omawali also had there was a question that was put up in terms of also thinking about practicality, right? So I think that in terms of thinking about whether we go Republican, whether we go Democratic, whether we go independent, I think having the posture that, as Dr. Rashid said, that what is it that we're really wanting, and then therefore choosing based on that. And I think that when we're thinking about liberation and sovereignty, which is the ultimate goal, but we also know that like that might not be the ultimate goal for every Black person within the US, right? So some people, they do want to assimilate. They do want to, get into positions of, whiteness and get more closer to, white capital and try to be, in a sense, the face of white supremacy in some sense, right? To maybe be the head of the plantation in some sense. So that is where it stops, right? And then we know that for others, like just like when we think about those who marooned and those who were still on the plantation, and those who, when we even think about revolutions, sometimes you're having people with differing ideas of what to do next, right? Like when you think about the Haitian Revolution, some people still wanted to be aligned with France, and others just wanted to be completely sovereign. And so those tensions still exist and affect the way that people make choices. But I do think that in terms of thinking about practicality, but also thinking about Ma'at, is that to not be stuck and not to be fearful, right? So if we're thinking about even Ma'at and we're thinking about African cosmology, and we think about how that positions oneself to feel in a moment where, you know, you're being told that if you don't choose either of these, then, you know, like the fear within you tells you that like everything is going to be the worst. Like, you know, you have people, I remember when Trump got elected, there people were crying, you know, like it was just like as if the world had ended. But then when you had Biden elected, people were like, oh, back to regular racism. Yes, thank you. Right. So that people understand that they're in this oppressive system, whether it's a Democrat or whether it's a Republican. But some people want to just, you know, as long as it's not you know, a Trump racist, right? If it's not like that overt type of racism, then they're okay with it. But I think in true thinking about righteousness, harmony, and justice, I think that there's a level, and thinking about the spirituality, the cosmology of that, and taking away that fear that is fed into the public to make you feel like if I don't go one way or the other, you know, that's it for us. But I think that is, you can vote for an independent party. I would say that like there is value in really thinking about and analyzing how much, you know, we vote for a party that is not the Democrat or not the Republican. And also, what else would you have to take? What else do we as a community take for that? And how big of a difference is it from the L's we've already been taking historically, the L's that we're currently taking, and what that would look like? And also, what would it mean for us to have to deal with a president, whichever, you know, any of them, whether it's you know, Democrat or Republican or independent? What would it mean to have to deal with them beyond voting, right? What does it mean to organize and continuously organize within your communities around you know, education, around economics, around housing, even just locally, right? What does that look like? Because even when we think about the presidency, you'll hear people say, well, you know, Obama, he couldn't do much. You know, he's just the president. It's Congress that has all the power. But then when you think about now, they're like, well, you know, if Trump is elected, he's the president. And so it's like, which one is it? Is it that the president holds not too much power and they can't really do anything? Or is it that the president holds so much power and they could do something? And Congress is also involved, and local politics is also involved, and local grassroots organizing is involved. And I think like it's, in thinking, trying to think of Ma'at and doing something in Ma'at, I think it's first not going with fear, not making decisions based on fear, but making decisions based on what our aims are. And so, and thinking about, okay, what are the pros and what are the cons of going for that? And what are the L's we might have to take if we don't vote for one of these parties? And are we prepared? And what are we willing to do with, you know, with taking any type of L's that come along with the choices that we made? I don't know if I've answered the question and all that, but
No, I think that was really. Let me bring us back into this format here until Neff gets back. But all right, yeah, like I guess we're approaching wrap up probably around like 5:30. But I do think it would be good for us to end collectively on this conversation just around lesser of two evils from a practicality perspective, right? Because for me personally, like when I look at the landscape, I think it's a very clear lesser of two evils in terms of when I think of like, you know, what the aims and objectives are for African people. Even when I think about Ma'at, right? You know, I look at Ma'at as the, you know, the reestablishment of a system of balance, of order, of truth on the planet, you know. And in order for that system to be reestablished, I think that African people have to be made stronger in order to bring that about. You know, our organizational capability, our families, our culture has to be strengthened in order to reestablish Ma'at on the planet, right? And looking at what pathway would get us closer to that strengthening, for me, there's a clear choice that weakens us, and there's a clear choice that strengthens us. And, you know, the context that I typically place it in I think that the underlying foundation has to be addressed, which is the shifting economic landscape. But sitting on top of that is two worldviews within or two approaches forward within the European paradigm, and I think that one or the other is going to impact us more or less, right? So on, starting at like the economic foundation, historically, if you look at like the colonial apparatus, when they come in and they take your land, right, your land being your means of survival, your direct connection to survival, they give you an alternative means of survival. You can sell your labor to me, and when you sell your labor, I'll give you this fiat currency, and now you can pay a rent to access that which you once controlled, but now you no longer control, right? Where the economic situation has moved to is the means to sell your labor are rapidly moving away. So on one side of the coin, they're like, hey, let's do what do they call it? The when they give everybody a check, what's that called? What's that?
Oh, not
Universal
reparations.
basic income.
Yeah, what do you
Oh.
say that again, brother? Come on.
Universal basic income.
Yeah. So one side they're saying that the solution here, let's just do universal basic income, and complement with abortion, right? So let's make sure we're decreasing the population and give them a check to keep them fed, and that's how we can deal with the issue. But the reality of the matter is that both sides understand that the economic paradigm is such that as we continue to move further into the future, the face of fascism has to become naked once again in order to maintain order, because people are like, hey, I can't eat. There's nowhere for me to sell my labor. Like I can't even afford to live. So as people get more and more agitated, it gets scarier for both sides. So when I look at one side, the globalists, and I look at the other side, the nationalists, the globalists, for me, like they have a set of ideas around gender, sexuality, family, nationhood, all of which I feel are massively destructive, not just to, the peoplehood of any group, but also the identity and consciousness and understanding, just your mind in general. Whereas the other side, kind of like similar to what Natasha said, is kind of like the racism, the devil that we know. You know what I mean? But at least in a situation within a nationalist situation, we can keep struggle locally, right? Where you have, and I guess this goes against what we said earlier in the conversation, because like the faces in power don't really respond to us, but at least we have that illusion of those faces. I sound crazy right now saying that we have the point I'm trying to make is that like in the globalist situation, like you don't have a local power by which to protest. You know what I mean? In a totalitarian situation. Whereas though in this nationalist situation, at least you can apply pressure to the president, the local entity here. And I just feel like where things are moving, I feel like a globalist direction would be much more harmful than a nationalist direction. And for me, that's why I would say that the lesser of two evils in this equation is the one that's fighting for nationalism, albeit white, racist, ethnocentric nationalism. So that's my craziness or my good trouble in 1 minute.
I just want to wade in real quick, and it's kind of synthesizing. I want to go back to that Ma'at piece, and I want to quote something that Jacob H. Carruthers wrote. He wrote that the Nisut's function, the Nisut was the ruler of Kemet, of ancient Egypt. The Nisut's overall function, like that of Usir, or some people would say Osar, is the establishment of Ma'at in Tawi. That's the United Two Lands, again, Upper and Lower Kemet, again, ancient Egypt, to establish conditions where enlightenment prevail over ignorance. And I wanted to bring that because, again, we're dealing with making a choice, right? We're faced within the current parameters, right? We're faced with parameters which limit our choices to fascism or fascism, right? Warmongering or warmongering. Well, one of those probably. Well, anyway. The point is that we're faced with two deeply, deeply problematic choices, and I think that we have to anchor ourselves in a particular vision of possibility that is beyond what either of these interests are proposing. And I shared that quote because one of the things that Dr. Carruthers emphasizes that within the paradigm of our ancestors, the idea was to create conditions where people were able to fulfill their full human potential, and in so doing, we're able to maximally contribute to the society. This is a process of formula which was designed around the achievement of human well-being. To that end, I'm not sure of the two predominant choices if either of them represents a viable possibility for African people. I think that, for me, that either of those possible futures are very uncertain to me. But I do think there's some value in interrogating what is afoot in the African world. So if we think about the situation that's happening in West Africa, particularly the so-called Francophone countries, right? Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. If we look at the situation in Haiti, if we look at this situation in even to a certain extent in Congo, and other parts, maybe a couple of other places in the Americas, we find in some places an inexorable movement around the affirmation of the self-determination of the people and the negation of Western domination. Again, we're faced with two parties that, of course, represent Western domination, the veneer of which being perhaps different in both instances, but neither of which represents the possibility of African liberation. And so to me, the presidential election itself represents a very problematic situation in many respects in terms of the interests of both of these entities. But I think that whatever choices that we make as it relates to the lesser of two evils, whatever choices that we make, I think have to be moored or anchored to a broader vision. That said, there's a Fulani proverb that says, the one who gathers stones little by little will one day build a mountain. And we are told, of course, and somebody highlighted, I think Brother Omowale made this point earlier, we've been told, and I can remember this going all the way back to the early 2000s, every 4 years, that if this person wins, the world will end. If this person ends, everything will be over. And of course, sometimes those people win and the world continues to exist. But my point, though, is that if we are moored to a broader vision of future possibility for ourselves, right? And if we see our work is also being linked not only to these other movements that are happening in the African world for self-determination, but also linked to a historical continuum of African movements in this country for self-determination, then I think it tempers the way that we think about possibly participating in this electoral process, choosing candidates that may be less popular, because those candidates and the type of ideas that they represent, I'm talking about third-party candidates, they may represent types of ideas which will inevitably grow in currency and grow in significance. I think, again, and I'll try to make this quick, I think that we have to see the voting process as one element, one small part of a larger process of political engagement for African people. Like Sister Natasha said, we should be organizing in our communities. Like our ancestors, have understood throughout the history of this country, we should be engaged in the process of institution building. Like Kwame Ture would emphasize, we should be engaged in a process of incessant political education in our communities, and see this political process as one which enables us to create a vehicle whereby we can engage in a further politicization of our people. Again, there are many, many, many lessons that can be taught about the shenanigans the Democratic Party is presently engaging in order to keep the Green Party off of the ballot in various states, particularly the state of Nevada. There are many lessons that can be taught about that. There are many lessons that can be taught about the reasons why the United States does not have universal health care. There are many, many lessons that can be taught about the proportion of the federal government budget that is devoted towards the war industries, right? And I think we can utilize these things as means of educating our people while also participating in this political process in a way which reflects the types of ideals that we actually aspire to. I choose not to choose either of the two evils personally. Everyone's not going to make that choice, and I don't disparage them for it. But I think that there's a greater choice. I think that we should aspire to achieving, Maulana Karenga says, the world that we want and deserve to live in. I think that we should align as much as possible our choices with that particular reality, rather than engaging in this idea of choosing between fascism versus fascism. But that's me personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That would require for us to trust the vision of our freedom that many of us don't even have the audacity to envision. And I think that that's really what we're trying to engage in the conversation for, because there's so many people coming into the conversation in different levels. There are some people who are not involved in politics at all, who are only oriented to politics via the state. So I wanted to make sure that for this question that all of the panelists were able to say their piece as far as what position, when it comes to these two evils that are being projected onto the masses at this moment, would be the best position for, or in general, what would be the best position? As Dr. Rashid said, we don't have to choose. The intention is for us to think beyond the selection that has been given to us, and the selection that will be made ultimately, because whether people choose to engage in the process or not, the selection will be made, not by the people. So I think it's important for us to, again, speak to that illusion.
Yeah, I personally won't be casting a ballot for either. But if I guess if I'm looking at the conditions for battle and I have to fight uphill and I have a choice between fighting uphill in the rain versus, fighting uphill not in the rain, I probably would choose the latter. Again, I won't be casting a ballot for either party in this election. But I just think that with one set of ideas, it brings a level of toxic rain that I feel like we already have an identity crisis and a crisis of consciousness in America among Black people, and likely a crisis of consciousness globally. But I feel like this toxic rain is going to make that crisis of consciousness much more difficult to surmount. So that's my perspective.
Yeah. Sister Natasha and Brother Zaire, would you like to speak on it?
Yeah, I can speak on it. Yeah, I would. I have the same position in terms of not voting for either of those parties, and voting for either a third party candidate or writing in a candidate. That's also a choice, right? To write in somebody. And the reason why I say that is because, like we were saying, like, one, moving beyond the fear mongering, right? That I'm not going to fear that either way. Oh, that I have to do this out of fear. No, I'm going to do it based on what my politics are. And like, Dr. Kamal said, what is my vision? And for those of us who are able to envision, right, and see a future for us that is beyond the confines of what they presented to us, I think it's almost a duty for us to continue to move within those lines, because you don't have a vision for a future and then decide to go elsewhere where that is not something that's going to get you closer to that vision, or doesn't align with that vision. And I also think when we think about the history of America, and currently we've been under racist presidents since the beginning of the creation of this country. And we've always struggled, no matter if it was a Republican in there, or no matter if it was a Democrat in there, no matter if it was someone that was for us or against us, we've always struggled with it, right? And so that struggle doesn't stop. So go vote for the one that aligns with the future of liberation for African people, as opposed for the one that, aligns with the maintenance of the settler colonial country.
I say, yeah, and strategically speaking, I would imagine that choosing the side that would more expedite, I guess, the side that would expedite the collapse of imperialism would be the wisest decision to make if a choice were to be made, not the one that will uphold it or continue the facade of progress, as we mentioned. But I want to allow you to speak, Brother Zaire.
Yeah, for me, I think the very balanced position, I always like to think about it in terms of like a nation within a nation, as connected with the continent and for that interest. I'm not going to tell anybody what to do, but I will say to think about it through that lens and say, what is a tangible for that nation? And from your own values of Ma'at, your own system of balance, what do you think is the best way to what do you prioritize? The safety of an individuals within your nation or a prolonged goal in the future? I think this is a big problem. I think it's kind of really what the subject is, and that's a lot of the arguments that come up. Is it an immediate satisfaction, immediate win versus a prolonged goal? I think this is the biggest issue. And so I'm not going to give an answer, but I'm going to tell the listeners to apply critical thinking and then do what you're going to do with that vote from there.
Okay. And I would like for us to answer just a few of the questions that the people in the chat asked before, expressing any closing remarks that you all have. So we have a question. Let me put this one up here. What do y'all think about the discourse around Kamala's race?
This is a hard one, right? I'm gonna take this point of view. This may be controversial. In the American political framework, she's Black due to the politics that have developed here, and in the sense that almost like that one drop rule that has became the significant way that politics is controlled here, is she becomes Black by default. They use that to then bring people on in. They use it as a way of manipulating the popular Black votes. So, and I mean, but that's been done with Obama and Michelle Obama and everybody. So it's not a new game, but just a new player, and it's a new player that for us, or for anybody who's against a two-party dictatorship, as I call it, it's probably one of the worst for us because what she represents, and that really makes it harder for us.
Yeah, I guess I'll move away from the good trouble here and just say, as a part of the Shrike Drum lecture series, the opening lecture that I did was called "The Ethnic Cleansing of Black America and the Black Immigrant Paradox." And, in a nutshell here, I think that, for those individuals in our community who are calling out the fact that historically this nation has used Black faces that have not experienced, historically, this nation, and I'm referring to the United States of America, has been very shrewd in how it has tried to signal that Black people in this country are advancing and progressing. And what they have done is they'll tie any Black face to like the history of Black people in this country. And there have been those of us that say, hold on, I want to call BS on that. You guys are developing this whole narrative that Barack Obama represents progress, for the African American politicity. I'm making up a word there, but he does not, because, there's a part in, I don't know if you guys have read Asada Shakur's autobiography, where she talks about, when she was a kid, she wanted to go to this like community fair and or festival, and Black people weren't allowed, but her mom was like, just chill. And her mom started speaking Spanish, and it just taught her a lesson that, as long as you're a Black person from elsewhere, kind of like some of the gates will be lifted for you that are closed to folks here. So the question around Kamala's race is a very complex one. And what I don't want to happen is the anger that some African Americans have for being played within their face to just be dismissed as like nonsensical because of like the history of race in this country. I think that those considerations should be considered if, race is now being used as a way to strategically whitewash or lay out a history or a moment that is that dictates that black people are progressing in this country when that's not the case. So that was a very long-winded answer. So hopefully I gave you something.
I also think that I kind of think, I guess, in terms of the conversation about her race, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. That I think it's not that it's not relevant in the sense that like we know that race in America and it's relevant, but I think it's almost not relevant in the sense that when you start to see racist Republicans, you know, being in the conversation, being like, oh guys, she said she's not black, like that whole thing just signals how much they've taken race in the way in which, because we know, like, you know, obviously white people created this idea of race, created their whiteness, and created, you know, like these categories that, you know, that we're using in terms of race. But I think that, and because of that, they decide when and which, you know, you can move out of any kind of race you want. Like, you know, if a white person wants to say they're black, okay, and especially in today's time, like the waters have become so muddied that like this people can say a lot of things that are like ridiculous in terms of like identity, or in terms of, in particular, thinking about race and how who's deciding what's black, kind of, you know, alluding to what, you know, was mentioned before in terms of like the one drop rule and what not the one drop rule, but that we as a people, we didn't create the we didn't you know, create race, and we didn't create the definition. And so, you know, when we want to, we can move the ideas of what it means to be black, but we're not doing that in the sense of like from a place of power, when we're deciding like, okay, this is black, and because we don't have like an overall understanding of it. But I say all that to say, I feel like because of the way that they are playing with race, and because they want you to, you know, they understand that there's that us as a people, we want to vote for our people who are going to do something for us, right? But they also understand that they've taken, you know, that, and they've taken the substance out of it, so that now if they give you someone who just has the skin color, you're going to be like, oh yeah, that person's black. And so that's why this conversation has become, and I feel like, you know, we haven't really seen this conversation as much. I mean, you know, even when it was around Obama, yes, there were people challenging whether or not he was American, blah, 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 blah. But I think that the idea that they've latched on to the idea that like, oh, okay, well, people, especially black people, oh, they'll take a symbol, you know, they'll take somebody as long as they got the skin color. And so therefore now we want to have that conversation on a national stage, and with people who don't even care about that to begin with, but as a way, because they know that they're playing with us, like you were saying, Omawale, playing in our face, because they've taken the substance out of us saying, you know, I'm supporting black people, you know, by black, because they've made it so that they're putting people who are not black politically, not black, you know, culturally, in terms of, you know, what are their cultural leanings, or you know, their cultural what's the word I'm looking for, or their cultural allegiances to black people, as a nation, as a diaspora, that they're now just the skin color with white talking points, with white allegiances, with, you know, white supremacist imperialist aims and support, so that now it's an issue around her. I feel like you know, that's why I think it's almost irrelevant, because at this point, just like they've done a lot of times, they've co-opted the conversation and the meaning that we've created around wanting to support black people, and made it become nothing, to the point where like now they're having this conversation as a national conversation.
Okay, I don't know if you want to comment on that any further, Brother Kamal. But otherwise, I know we had some other here, but we have to wrap up soon.
Yeah, just real quick. I think I really appreciate both what Sister Natasha and Brother Omawale said. I think we have to be careful about participating in a political discourse that allows race or any other type of identity construct to become a proxy for a particular type of political orientation. And you know, when Omawale, you know, this idea of them playing in our faces, like he said, that's what's being played upon, this idea that we are treating race, and it's the same, and people on the left do this all the time. Gender becomes a proxy for a particular type of political orientation. Sexuality becomes a proxy for a particular type of political orientation. And so in this context, race, this person is Black, therefore, like to Natasha's point, that the assumption, right, is that this person inevitably somehow has some connection to the political interests of Black folks. And to me, the question of whether Kamala Harris is Black is less relevant to me as to whether Kamala Harris's politics are Black, right? As to whether Kamala Harris' politics reflect the interests of African people. And I think that's what we have to be focused on. I don't, again, that other discussions are complicated one. I don't necessarily want to wade into that one right now, but I do think we have to be mindful, again, of the danger of symbols. Again, people will use symbols to manipulate and control you. And right now, the symbol of Blackness and the symbolism of Blackness has, and is, and is being used to narrow or diminish our critical gaze.
Okay. So I wanted there are a few other questions in here. I know we're supposed to be wrapping up right now, so I just wanted to check in if you guys wanted to make any final statements. If you're open to taking a few more questions from the chat. Okay.
I'm down with the consensus, whatever the consensus is.
Well,
okay.
I can give my final statement, but I don't have to go first.
I just talked for a long time, so I don't have to go first either.
Yeah.
You can go ahead.
Final statement of the night. I think African, always root yourself in an African-centered consciousness. And I think always apply ma'at to yourself, and even any ideology, any kind of conception, any kind of answer that you hear, always apply that to yourself, and also apply those principles to the political landscape that you're in, and move forth in yourself as a strong African-centered being.
That's true. Right. Wally, would you like to go, or Sister Natasha?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my closing remarks are as lukewarm as my opening remarks. It's like, I like ultimately, I don't really think it matters who is in the White House. I think that what truly matters is ultimately, my response is this: the situation for Black people in America or across the globe is not going to change until Black people make a determination that we want the situation to change. And what I have observed from much of the discourse around this 4-year selection process is that there aren't too many of us who actually want the situation to change. There are far too many who are comfortable in this paradigm, even though we're just a crisis away from extinction. But I don't know. I don't know what to express beyond frustration when I look at a slave that doesn't want to be free. You know what I mean? So I think that those are my closing remarks. You know what I mean? Malcolm said we used to look around on the plantation and you tell folks, let's get out of here. They're like, where we going to go that's better than here? And ultimately, we haven't really gotten beyond that in our thinking and or our consciousness. So in that regard, I hate to end as a Debbie Downer, but yeah, I think that we'll get free when we make a determination that we want to be free, and that's what I'll close on.
That's a good topic for the next show. Is there hope?
Yeah, we have a lot of really good questions in the chat. So I'll take note of these questions. Maybe we can continue this conversation. I do think it's necessary because so many people are not convinced, right? Not convinced to think beyond the two evils, not convinced to the power of their energy beyond the vote, you know? So I think it's an ongoing piece. I think sometimes we can get into an echo chamber and kind of forget, you know, or even just feel like it's not worth sowing the seeds of the ideas that come that birth sovereignty, so that some people may, you know, be inspired to shift their perspective or to expand their consciousness about their participation in the system. So I do think that it's an ongoing conversation. So I'd love to have all of you back here again for us to take it further. Because I'm honestly disappointed to not cover some of these questions because they're so good. So I'll make sure to take note of them. Did everyone give their closing statement?
I'll say something. I actually write about I write about this quandary in my book about Jacob H. Carruthers finding our way through the desert, Jacob H. Carruthers and the restoration of an African worldview. And the 10th chapter in the book talks about the Haitian Revolution. And one of the things that I talk about towards the end of that chapter is that African people have been presented with various idiomatic discourses, political slogans, and political language that implicit within it represents a particular view of reality, a view of the condition of African people, and a methodology whereby that condition might be addressed. And one of the things that he emphasized, that Jacob H. Carruthers emphasized in his book, The Irritated Genie, is that one of the challenges in the Haitian Revolution was a binary that emerged between those who strove after what Dessalines called the phantom of liberty and those who attempted to model their political project on the irritated genie. And one represented reconciliation with the system of Western domination, the other represented eradication of the system of Western domination upon the backs of African people. And I think, you know, to Natasha's point about the past and how the past shapes the present and the future, inevitably we are constantly represented. We are represented with this particular quandary, that is the political project of our ancestors, those who saw sovereignty. That project has yet to be realized. Yet many of us continue to labor within a framework that perceives the phantom of liberty as the apex of social and historical possibility of African people. Many of our ancestors didn't believe this, and I think they were right to not believe it. I think there's a different possibility that represents the best possible future for African people. And I think that we need, therefore, to expand our thinking of what politics entails and orient ourselves towards the actualization of that particular possibility, which I would argue is sovereignty.
And I would say, final, in terms of my final thoughts, I think back to a woman that I know, who I visited in Mississippi one time, and she organizes in Mississippi, and she was telling me about how when the local elections happen, they bring out, well, when the national elections happen, everything is, within the I think she was living in Jackson, but when the national elections happen, like, okay, people are just voting regular. But that when the local elections happen, all of a sudden you see an influx of white people that you've never seen before. Like, just the level of it is a lot. And that there is a concerted effort to maintain control of the local level in terms of like what people can do in terms of access to housing, in terms of who's where the money is going for businesses and for infrastructure. And so I think that is an important part for us to think about in terms of what it is that we want done and what we can do on the local level for ourselves, especially when we're thinking about if we are participating, like, who are the people that we are choosing to put into those positions? How are we showing up within the particular communities that we live in and putting pressure on those areas? Because there is definitely a way that, locally you can affect things that doesn't necessarily come from the national, when we're thinking about, you know, like the national election and the president per se. And so I guess I say that to say that, especially thinking about the future and thinking about long term, what is it that's being done locally and within our own communities, so that we are building toward what we want, right? Not waiting for things to fall apart so that we can then build once they've fallen apart, but how are we building toward what it is that we want at the same time that we're looking at how we're engaging with these systems that already exist, and how are we doing those two things at the same time, and what's going to benefit those things that we're building.
Ashe. So I do want to thank everyone for being here. And on the note that Sister Natasha left us on, I do want to encourage people to join the THNK militia. That is one way that you can support local initiatives as well as global initiatives around things that really impact us the most. For example, our Organic Food for the People initiative, which is focusing on a local level to create a network of urban farms in the cities and a network of Black urban growers, as well as aligning those urban growers with farmers across the nation. So our Organic Food for the People initiative is based in Brooklyn, in the heart of Brooklyn, in Weeksville, one of the first sovereign Black communities that was created post-enslavement. So it's a very historical land space that we have as our base. And we would love to have more members join to be able to support the work that we're doing at THNK Community Garden, but overall for the Organic Food for the People initiative. Also on a global level or virtual level, you can join the ARC. So Brother Omawale and I are the co-captains of the ARC, the African Rehabilitation Center. So by becoming a member of either the African War College or the THNK militia, you do get access to the Amos Wilson Collective, where you would be able to participate in this revolutionary practice of building transformational power. And for us, it's really about doing that inner work. So for us to organize our people, as our beloved ancestor Kwame Ture said, you know, organize the people or the conditions will. And in order for us to organize the people, we first have to be able to organize ourselves. So we have medicine systems that are in place within our institution, our instrument that's building multiple institutions to be able to build transformational power on an individual level, right? Because really you are the work. And that's what we have to recognize, right? If we want to transform things, the best way to do it is to model nature as our ancestors did and allow ourselves to have a fundamental transformation on a cellular level as individuals. So we do a lot of inner healing work. We define revolution as healing, liberation, restoration, elevation, and expansion. And of course, that starts with healing from the Ma'afa and the past paradigm that still has its grips on our minds and our hearts, right? So liberating our spirits first and foremost. So I want to encourage you all to join the THNK militia. You can join at tehutma.org/join. So I hope to see you all. Please follow us on Instagram to learn more about our local initiatives, particularly in Brooklyn at THNK Community Garden. And I hope to see you all for our next stream. I want to thank my lovely panelists for being here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And I hope to have you back next time.
Thanks for having us.
All right, power.
Peace.
Peace, peace, peace.